The call came on the morning of my graduation ceremony while I was ironing my cap and gown, the black polyester stiff with newness and possibility. My phone lit up with my mother's name, a name I hadn't seen in weeks despite my numerous texts about the ceremony. Sophia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother Eleanor's voice was crisp as starched linen. I need you to pick up your brother from the airport at 2 p.m. for his interview tomorrow. The bedroom of my tiny off-campus apartment seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in as I processed her words. 4 years I'd worked toward this moment, double majoring in environmental science and business administration while working nights at the campus library, and she was calling about an airport pickup that perfectly coincided with my graduation ceremony. "Mom, today is my graduation. I can't miss it." My voice sounded hollow, distant, as if coming from someone else entirely. Her tone sharpened like a newly honed blade. "The ceremony is just a formality. They'll mail your diploma regardless. Marcus needs to make a good impression at this interview. It's with Wellington and Burke." A strange heat spread through my chest as 23 years of conditional love crystallized in that single callous request. The weight of my mother's disapproval had been a burden I'd carried since childhood, a constant companion as familiar as my own shadow. It suddenly felt insignificant compared to the years of sacrifice that had brought me to this day. "This is my college graduation, Mom. I've worked for this moment for 4 years." My words hung in the morning air, mingling with the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam that cut across my cramped bedroom. "Family loyalty is a two-way street, Sophia," she replied, ice-coating each syllable. "If you can't do this one thing for your brother, don't expect our support anymore." My name is Sophia. I'm 23 and a first-generation college student. This is the story of how I finally chose the future that mattered. For months before graduation, I'd noticed the growing distance between us. My mother's criticism of my major choice, my scholarship applications, my rented apartment that was nothing like the suburban home where my younger brother Marcus still lived in his childhood bedroom. My brother had always been the golden child. His business school ambitions and internship offers a constant counterpoint to my impractical environmental passions. I'd been trying anyway, maintaining my 3.9 GPA while working 25 hours a week, stretching every dollar from my library job and weekend tutoring gigs since my father Daniel, a dedicated high school science teacher, died of an unexpected heart attack during my freshman year. I'd send my research papers home, seeking some acknowledgement, while ignoring how my mother would respond with clippings about Marcus's internship features in the local paper. "Mom says you could have gone to Wharton if you'd focused more on practical careers like Marcus," my brother had once reported, innocently repeating words that stung like salt water on an open wound. I'd smiled through the pain, explaining that environmental science was tackling humanity's greatest challenges, worth more than any corner office. I balanced it all, the grief of losing my father, the financial strain of college, my mother's conditional support, because no one needed to remind me what was at stake until the day my acceptance letter to the prestigious Holton Fellowship graduate program arrived, promising full funding for my master's degree and a stipend that would finally give me breathing room. The catch? I needed to accept in person at the ceremony, or forfeit the spot. The first weeks of senior spring semester passed in a blur of thesis defenses and graduation preparations. My faculty advisor, Dr. Jameson, had nominated me for the university's Outstanding Scholar Award, though I'd dismissed it as a kind gesture with little chance of success. "You're underestimating yourself, Sophia," she had insisted, her keen eyes seeing something in me I couldn't yet recognize in myself. "Your research on urban watershed restoration has real-world applications. The committee will see that." I curled up on my second-hand couch the night before graduation, flipping through the ceremony program delivered to graduating seniors. The outstanding scholar would be announced tomorrow, along with the surprise recipient of the President's Fellowship, a full ride to any graduate program in the country. Dreams too extravagant to entertain. But that didn't stop the whisper of "what if" from echoing in my mind as I fell asleep. By morning, my roommate Zoe had already left for her family's pre-graduation breakfast, leaving me alone with my ironing board and thoughts when my mother's call came through. Standing in that cramped apartment, her ultimatum hanging between us, something inside me finally broke free. 23 years of seeking approval, of making excuses for the coldness, of believing I was somehow defective for not fitting the mold she'd created. "I choose graduation," I said, my voice suddenly calm and unshakable. "I've earned this moment. Goodbye." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hung up, silenced my phone, and finished pressing my gown, a strange peace settling over me despite the turmoil. My hands shook slightly as I pinned my cap in place, but my resolve remained steady. The mirror reflected someone I barely recognized, a woman standing tall, eyes clear with purpose. Gone was the perpetual apologetic slouch, the nervous habit of checking my phone for my mother's disapproval. The May morning bloomed bright and warm as I walked across campus toward the auditorium where we would line up. Cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow across the academic quad, nature's perfect confetti for the occasion. Fellow graduates called out greetings, their faces alight with the peculiar mixture of excitement and nostalgia that marked this transitional day. "Sophia!" Dr. Jameson waved from near the science building, her academic regalia already donned, the velvet tam sitting at a jaunty angle atop her silver hair. She hurried over, her expression concerned. "Your mother just called my office looking for you. Everything okay?" The revelation that my mother would go so far as to contact my advisor sent a jolt through me. "She wants me to skip graduation to pick up my brother from the airport," I admitted, the words sounding even more absurd spoken aloud. "She threatened to cut me off if I didn't." Dr. Jameson's expression shifted from concern to something fiercer. "And what did you decide?" "I'm here, aren't I?" I managed a small smile, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. She squeezed my shoulder, her pride evident. "Good for you. Some lessons about boundaries are harder than any classroom could teach." She checked her watch. "I need to join the faculty procession, but Sophia," her eyes held mine, "whatever happens today, remember that you've earned every moment of it." I nodded, throat tight with emotion, and continued toward the auditorium. Inside the staging area, hundreds of black-robed graduates milled about, adjusting caps and hoods, taking selfies, hugging friends. I spotted Zoe waving frantically from the business school section, her family crowded behind her. "Sophia," she called, breaking away to rush over. "My parents want to meet you before we line up. And look," she thrust her phone at me, "the president's fellowship announcement was leaked early. They're saying it's between you and that guy from engineering, Ethan something." I stared at the screen, disbelieving. "That's impossible. I never even applied for it." "You don't apply, dummy. Faculty nominations only. Come meet my parents, then we'll find our places." She tugged me toward her beaming family. Meeting Zoe's parents, their genuine interest in my plans, their congratulations on completing my degree, made my mother's absence ache in new ways. I excused myself after a few minutes, needing space to gather my thoughts before the ceremony began. In a quiet corner, I finally checked my phone. 12 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my brother, a text from Marcus. "Mom's freaking out. Can't you just skip the stupid ceremony? My interview is way more important than you walking across a stage." The old Sophia would have crumbled, would have rushed to the airport, desperate to preserve the fragile illusion of family harmony. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me this morning. I typed a response to my brother. "My graduation matters. Take an Uber. I'll reimburse you." Then I silenced my phone again and joined my fellow environmental science graduates as the procession began to form. The ceremony itself passed in a dreamlike blur, the procession into the packed auditorium, the sea of proud families, the speeches about futures unwritten and potentials unlimited. I scanned the crowd repeatedly, some small part of me still hoping to spot my mother's face, but the seat I'd reserved remained conspicuously empty. Instead, I focused on Dr. Jameson's encouraging smile from the faculty section, on Zoe's parents who waved enthusiastically whenever I looked their way. The university president, Dr. Harlow, approached the podium for what was typically the most anticipated moment of the ceremony. Before we begin conferring degrees, I have the distinct pleasure of announcing this year's Outstanding Scholar Award and the recipient of the President's Fellowship. My heart thundered in my chest, though I told myself it was foolish to hope. The outstanding scholar went to Ethan Chen from engineering, as Zoe had predicted, for his work on sustainable building materials. I applauded sincerely, relieved to have the moment of suspense behind me. And now, Dr. Harlow continued, the President's Fellowship, our most prestigious award, given to a graduating senior who has demonstrated exceptional academic merit, innovative thinking, and commitment to making a meaningful difference in their field. The auditorium fell silent. The collective held breath of thousands, creating a moment of perfect stillness. This year's recipient has maintained a 3.9 GPA while working 25 hours weekly, has published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals as an undergraduate, and has developed an urban watershed restoration model that's already being implemented by our city's Environmental Commission. My hands went numb. Those were my accomplishments, my research, my hours in the lab and at the library. The President's Fellowship, providing full funding for graduate studies at any institution in the country, goes to Ms. Sophia Chen from Environmental Science and Business Administration. The roar of applause hit me like a physical force. Zoe screamed from somewhere to my left. Dr. Jameson was on her feet, applauding wildly. I rose on unsteady legs, somehow making my way to the stage where Dr. Harlow waited with an oversized certificate and a warm handshake. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen," he said, his voice now lowered for just me to hear. "Your dual thesis on balancing business interests with environmental restoration was extraordinary." The committee was unanimous. I thanked him, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. As I turned to face the crowd, certificate in hand, I spotted movement at the back of the auditorium. My mother, arriving late, her expression unreadable from this distance. Our eyes met across the sea of graduates, and for once, I didn't look away first. The moment stretched between us like a thread pulled taut. Years of seeking approval condensed into a single shared glance. Then I smiled. Not the apologetic smile of someone perpetually seeking forgiveness for existing, but the confident smile of someone who finally understood their own worth. As I descended the stairs, my future suddenly wide open, and full of possibility, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my mother. "We need to talk after the ceremony." No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the achievement she had just witnessed. Just another demand. Another attempt to reassert control. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding, and rejoined my classmates. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The fellowship meant I could pursue my master's without financial strain, without the constant threat of support withdrawn at the slightest deviation from my mother's expectations. Today marked not just the end of my undergraduate journey, but the beginning of something far more important, my independence. The air in the auditorium felt electric with possibility as we moved through the remaining ceremony, each graduate crossing the stage to receive their diploma covered to cheers from family and friends. When my name was called again, the applause reminded me that I had built connections beyond the family that had failed me, professors who believed in my potential, friends who celebrated my successes, a community that recognized value my mother could not see. After the ceremony, graduates spilled onto the sunny quad, searching for families amid the chaos of celebration. I spotted my mother standing alone near the science building, her arms crossed, her expression a familiar mixture of disappointment and impatience. For a moment, I considered avoiding her entirely, slipping away to join Zoe and her family for their celebratory lunch. Instead, I walked directly toward her, my diploma in one hand, my fellowship certificate in the other. No more avoidance. No more pretending. Whatever came next, I would face it standing tall. "You're late," I said simply as I approached. The words free of accusation but firmly stating the reality. She bristled visibly. Traffic was terrible. I had to park 3 blocks away. "No congratulations. No acknowledgement of my achievement. We need to discuss your brother's situation. He's stranded at the airport." I looked at my mother, really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time. The perfectly coiffed hair, the expensive dress, the jewelry she had carefully selected for an occasion she had nearly missed entirely. Behind her carefully constructed facade, I saw something I'd never fully recognized before. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of a daughter who no longer needed her approval to define her worth. "Marcus is 21 years old with a credit card," I said calmly. "He can get an Uber." I'm having lunch with Zoe's family to celebrate graduation. Her eyes widened slightly, unused to this direct refusal. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Mom? The question wasn't angry, just genuinely curious. You didn't pay for my education. You didn't support my choice of major. You haven't visited campus once in 4 years. You nearly missed my graduation because Marcus's convenience was more important. She flinched as if I'd raised a hand to her, though my voice had remained level. That's not fair. We've always what? Loved me conditionally? Made it clear that Marcus's needs would always come first? Let me know that nothing I achieved would ever be quite good enough? The words poured out, years of unspoken truths finally finding voice. Around us, happy families took photos, graduates hugged professors, laughter and congratulations filled the air. The contrast between those joyful reunions and our tense confrontation couldn't have been starker. I just won a full fellowship that will fund my entire graduate education, I continued, holding up the certificate. The president of the university announced it in front of thousands of people. And your first words to me are about Marcus being inconvenienced at the airport. For a moment, something like shame flickered across my mother's face. Then her expression hardened again. Your brother has an important interview tomorrow. His future. My future matters too, I interrupted, my voice still calm but absolutely firm. That's what I'm trying to make you understand. I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to recognize that we both deserve your support. She stared at me, clearly struggling to process this new version of her daughter, one who spoke her truth without flinching, who held her ground without apology. In the silence between us, my phone chimed with an incoming text. Dr. Jameson, looking for you. The Wellington Fellowship Committee wants to meet their newest member. I have to go, I said, tucking the phone away. There's a reception for fellowship recipients. We can talk tomorrow, after Marcus's interview, and after you've had some time to think about whether you want a relationship with me based on mutual respect rather than obedience. I turned to leave, then paused, adding softly, Dad would have been here today. He would have been proud. The mention of my father, the parent who had encouraged my scientific curiosity, who had never pitted his children against each other, struck home in a way nothing else could have. Something crumpled in my mother's carefully composed expression. Sophia, wait, she called. But I was already walking away, my graduation gown billowing behind me like a superhero's cape, my future stretching before me, wide open, and finally, truly mine. The reception for fellowship recipients was held in the university's grand alumni hall, a vaulted space with marble columns and portraits of distinguished graduates lining the oak-paneled walls. As I entered, Dr. Jameson broke away from a cluster of faculty to greet me, her eyes bright with pride. There she is, our star of environmental science. She guided me toward a group of well-dressed people gathered near a portrait of the university's first female graduate. Sophia, I'd like you to meet the Wellington Fellowship Committee. They're very eager to speak with you about your watershed research. For the next hour, I found myself engaged in animated conversations about my work, my future plans, and the potential applications of my research models. These accomplished academics and professionals were treating me as a colleague, not a student, asking thoughtful questions and offering connections to researchers in related fields. The respect in their eyes was unmistakable, a stark contrast to the dismissal I'd grown accustomed to at home. Miss Chen, the committee chair, Dr. Rivera, said as she handed me her business card, "We're particularly impressed by your innovative approach to balancing economic viability with environmental restoration. Your dual major has given you a perspective many specialists lack." Her words washed over me like warm sunshine after years in shadow. My mother had called my dual major indecisive and unfocused, but here was one of the country's leading environmental economists, praising the very choice my family had criticized. As the reception continued, I found myself standing beside University President Harlow, near the refreshment table. He greeted me with genuine warmth, congratulating me again on the fellowship. "You know," he said, refilling his glass of sparkling water. "I read your application materials personally. Your essay about growing up watching your father teach science to disinterested high schoolers, how he made them care about the natural world through practical demonstrations rather than textbooks, that stayed with me." My throat tightened at the mention of my father. He believed education should connect to real life, I managed. He would have loved seeing the city adopt my watershed model. "He sounds like a remarkable teacher," President Harlow commented. "Will he be joining us today?" The question was innocent, but it pierced straight through me. "He passed away during my freshman year. Heart attack." The words still felt foreign on my tongue, clinical and insufficient to describe the loss of the parent who had always believed in me. President Harlow's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm very sorry to hear that. And your mother? I hope she's enjoying the celebrations?" The image of my mother standing alone near the science building, her face tightening with disapproval, flashed through my mind. She had other priorities today. Something in my tone must have revealed more than my words, because President Harlow studied me carefully before speaking again. "You know, Ms. Chen, in my 30 years in academia, I've observed that exceptional students often emerge from two types of family backgrounds: those with extraordinary support, and those who succeed despite extraordinary challenges." He paused, his gaze both kind and perceptive. "Either way, what matters is what you do with the opportunities before you now." His insight struck me with the force of recognition. I had spent so long trying to earn my mother's approval that I'd nearly missed seeing my own achievements clearly. "Thank you, sir. I intend to make the most of every opportunity." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "The Holton program will be lucky to have you. And if you need any guidance navigating graduate school options, my door is always open to President's Fellows." As the reception wound down, I exchanged contact information with several committee members and faculty from other departments who expressed interest in collaborative research. My phone, silenced earlier, had been vibrating periodically in my pocket throughout the event. When I finally checked it after saying my goodbyes, the screen displayed 17 missed calls, 15 from my mother, 2 from Marcus, and a cascade of increasingly angry text messages. The most recent from Marcus read, "Thanks for nothing. Had to take a $95 Uber. Mom is furious. Way to ruin my interview chances by stressing me out." A familiar wave of guilt began to rise, then receded as quickly as it had come. For years, I had been the family emotional support system, the peacekeeper, the one who sacrificed to maintain harmony. Not today. Today I had chosen myself. And that choice had led me to a room full of people who valued my mind and my work. Instead of responding immediately, I texted Zoe. "Just finished at the reception. Still up for celebration dinner?" Her response came instantly. "Yes. My parents insist you join us. They've already reserved a table at Vincenzo's. Meet us there at 7? I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked across the nearly empty quad, my graduation gown draped over my arm, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the grass. Campus had quieted, as families departed for celebratory dinners, and graduates began the bittersweet process of moving out of dorm rooms and apartments. Back at my small apartment, I changed from my formal dress into something more comfortable for dinner, carefully hanging my cap and gown in my closet, mementos of a day that had changed everything. As I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, my phone rang again. My mother. This time, I answered. "Sophia?" Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to discuss what happened today." "Yes, we do," I agreed, my tone neutral but firm. "But not right now. I'm having dinner with Zoe's family to celebrate graduation." "You're choosing strangers over your own family?" The accusation was so familiar, so predictable, that it almost made me laugh. "They're not strangers, Mom. They're people who showed up today, who celebrated with me, who didn't ask me to skip one of the most important days of my life for an airport pickup." Her sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "You've changed." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I have." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken expectations and disappointments. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "The president of the university announced your name. Everyone was looking at me. Of course. In my mother's world, the most significant aspect of my receiving a prestigious fellowship was how it reflected on her. The stares of strangers, the social implications, the status gained or lost. "I'll be home next weekend to pack up the rest of my things," I said, avoiding the bait. "We can talk then if you'd like. Right now I need to go." "Your brother's interview is tomorrow morning," she reminded me, a last attempt to reassert the family hierarchy. "He needs to be well rested and focused." "I hope it goes well for him," I said sincerely. "But that has nothing to do with me having dinner with friends who came to my graduation." I ended the call before she could respond, a small act of self-preservation that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. Then I grabbed my purse and headed out to meet Zoe and her family, my step lighter than it had been in years. Vincenzo's was crowded with other graduation parties, the atmosphere festive with laughter and popping champagne corks. Zoe waved frantically from a corner table where her parents and younger brother were already seated. "There she is! The genius who's going to save our watersheds and make a fortune doing it," she announced as I approached. Her father stood to pull out a chair for me, her mother immediately filling a champagne flute and passing it my way. "A toast," Mr. Alvarez declared, raising his glass, "to Sophia, who has worked harder than anyone I know to reach this day. May your future be as bright as your mind." "To Sophia," echoed around the table, and I blinked back unexpected tears. This warmth, this genuine celebration of achievement, this uncomplicated joy in another's success, was what family should feel like. The dinner passed in a blur of delicious food, warm conversation, and genuine interest in my plans. The Alvarez family listened attentively as I explained the Holton Fellowship and the opportunities it would provide, asked thoughtful questions about my research, and shared stories of their own college experiences. "Sophia," Mrs. Alvarez said as we lingered over dessert, "we've heard so much about you from Zoe these past 4 years. Your dedication to your studies while working so many hours. It's remarkable. You should be very proud of yourself." "Thank you," I managed, the simple acknowledgement threatening to undo me completely. "It means a lot to hear that." "And where is your family celebrating tonight?" Mr. Alvarez asked innocently, glancing around as if they might be at a nearby table. Zoe shot her father a warning look, but I appreciated his straightforwardness. "My mother and brother had other commitments today," I said simply. Mrs. Alvarez's expression softened with understanding. "Well, their loss is our gain. We're delighted you could join us." As dinner wound down, Zoe's parents insisted on covering the bill despite my protests. "Consider it our graduation gift," Mr. Alvarez said firmly. "We're very proud of both of you." Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to part ways, Mrs. Alvarez enveloped me in a warm hug. "Zoe tells me you're staying in town for the summer before graduate school starts," she said. "You'll come for Sunday dinners, yes?" No arguments, I insist. The simple invitation, so genuine, so free of manipulation or conditions, touched something deep within me. "I'd like that very much," I said, my voice slightly unsteady. Walking back to my apartment through the warm May evening, I reflected on the day's extraordinary contrasts. I had lost something, the illusion that I could somehow earn my mother's unconditional approval through achievement, but gained something far more valuable, the recognition that I deserved to be valued for exactly who I was. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Interview prep going terribly. Mom won't stop complaining about you. Thanks a lot." In the past, this message would have sent me spiraling into guilt and frantic damage control. Tonight, I simply replied, "I'm sorry you're stressed. Get a good night's sleep. You'll do great tomorrow." Then I silenced my phone again and continued walking, refusing to be pulled back into the family drama. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and settled onto the second-hand couch, surrounded by 4 years' worth of accumulated textbooks, notes, and memories. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of move-outs, the sorting of possessions, decisions about what to keep and what to leave behind. But tonight was for savoring the sweetness of achievement, the recognition of years of hard work, and the first tentative steps toward a future defined by my own choices rather than my family's expectations. I pulled out the President's Fellowship Certificate, running my fingers over the embossed university seal, the formal language acknowledging my extraordinary academic achievement and promise. The validation felt almost unreal after years of being made to feel that my choices were misguided, my efforts insufficient. A knock at my door startled me from my reverie. Opening it revealed Dr. Jameson, still in her academic regalia minus the tam, holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said with a smile, "but I thought you might enjoy a proper toast to your success." I invited her in, hastily clearing books from the coffee table to make space for the glasses. "I'm still processing everything that happened today," I admitted as she expertly opened the champagne with a satisfying pop. "That's perfectly understandable," she replied, pouring the bubbling liquid. "The President's Fellowship is life-changing, and from what I observed today, you may be experiencing other significant changes as well." She handed me a glass, her perceptive gaze reminding me that little escaped her notice. I had worked as her research assistant for 3 years. She had seen me cancel plans to rush home when my mother demanded, had watched me struggle to balance family obligations with academic deadlines. My mother wanted me to skip graduation to pick up my brother from the airport, I found myself explaining. When I refused, she threatened to cut me off financially. But after the ceremony, after the fellowship announcement, I realized I don't need her approval anymore. I don't need to keep trying to earn her love. Dr. Jameson nodded thoughtfully. "That's an extraordinarily difficult realization to come to, and an even harder boundary to establish. I'm proud of you for standing your ground." "It feels like betrayal," I admitted quietly. "Like I'm turning my back on my family." "Or perhaps," she suggested gently, "you're simply refusing to enable unhealthy dynamics any longer. There's a difference between loyalty and submission, Sophia." We sipped our champagne in contemplative silence for a moment before she continued. "When I nominated you for the President's Fellowship, I wrote about your extraordinary resilience. Not just your academic achievements, impressive as they are, but your capacity to thrive despite obstacles that would have deterred many others. That quality will serve you well in graduate school and beyond." She raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, hard-earned wisdom, and the courage to choose your own path." "To new beginnings," I echoed, the champagne bubbles dancing on my tongue like possibilities. After Dr. Jameson left, I curled up on my bed with my laptop, opening the folder containing graduate program materials. The Holton Fellowship would cover tuition and living expenses for my master's degree, a remarkable opportunity that had seemed impossibly out of reach just months ago. But the President's Fellowship opened even more doors: funding for doctoral studies if I chose to continue, connections to prestigious research institutions, mentorship from leaders in my field. My phone screen lit up with an incoming call, my mother again. This time, I let it go to voicemail, a small act of self-care that felt surprisingly powerful. Whatever crisis she perceived could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for dreaming, for allowing myself to imagine a future unlimited by others' expectations. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect late May day. I had barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities, plans, and the occasional wave of anxiety about the confrontation with my mother that inevitably awaited. But as I made coffee in my tiny kitchen, watching the early sunlight filter through the leaves of the potted plant on my windowsill, a cutting from my father's beloved garden that I had nurtured throughout college, I felt a surprising sense of peace. Today marked the beginning of my life on my own terms. Whatever came next, I would face it standing in my truth, rather than contorting myself to meet others' expectations. My phone chimed with a text from Zoe. "Parents want to help us move out. Dad's bringing his truck. Okay if they come around 10?" Quote. I smiled at the simple kindness of the offer, typing back a grateful acceptance. Then, fortified by caffeine and newfound resolve, I began the process of sorting through my belongings, deciding what would accompany me into the next chapter of my life. By mid-morning, Zoe and her parents had arrived, bringing coffee, donuts, and the cheerful energy that seemed to accompany them everywhere. Mr. Alvarez and Zoe tackled the dismantling of furniture, while Mrs. Alvarez helped me pack kitchen items, working with efficient good humor that made the daunting task feel almost enjoyable. "Zoe tells me you'll be staying in town for the summer?" Mrs. Alvarez inquired as we wrapped mugs in newspaper. I nodded, carefully placing the wrapped items in a box. I have a research position with Dr. Jameson through August, and then I'll start graduate school in September. And you'll be looking for a new apartment? She asked, her tone casual but her eyes watchful. Yes, I need to be out of student housing by next week, I confirmed, a flicker of anxiety rising at the thought of apartment hunting in the tight rental market. I've been looking online, but everything close to campus is either unavailable or beyond my budget. Mrs. Alvarez exchanged a glance with her husband, some unspoken communication passing between them. We have a small garden apartment, separate entrance, kitchenette, private bath, she said carefully. Our niece lived there during college, but she graduated last year and moved to Chicago. It's been sitting empty since then. I stared at her, not quite comprehending what she was suggesting. We'd be happy to rent it to you for the summer, or longer if you'd like, she continued. The rent would be reasonable, and you'd have privacy but not be completely alone. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I found myself momentarily speechless. That's incredibly kind, I managed finally, but I couldn't impose. Nonsense, Mr. Alvarez interjected, setting down the desk lamp he'd been disconnecting. It's no imposition. The apartment is just sitting there, and frankly, we'd feel better knowing it's occupied by someone we trust. Plus, Zoe added with a grin, you'd be saving me from having to move again in 3 months when my lease is up. I've been thinking about asking them if I could move back home to save money before law school. The synchronicity of their needs, with mine, seemed almost too perfect, a lifeline appearing precisely when I needed it most. If you're sure, I'd be very grateful, I said, my voice catching slightly. Settled then, Mrs. Alvarez declared with satisfaction. You'll come home with us today, see the apartment, and if it suits you, consider it yours. As we continued packing, my phone vibrated with an incoming call, Marcus this time. I hesitated, then stepped into the hallway to answer. Hey, I said cautiously. How did the interview go? How do you think it went? He snapped, his voice tight with stress. I was exhausted from dealing with Mom's meltdown all night. Thanks for that, by the way. The familiar pattern of blame attempted to reassert itself, but I refused to accept responsibility for their reactions to my choices. I'm sorry you were stressed, I said evenly. But my attending my own graduation isn't the cause of Mom's behavior or your interview performance. His bitter laugh carried through the phone. Easy for you to say with your fancy fellowship. Some of us still need Mom's help, you know. The barb stung, but not as deeply as it once would have. The fellowship I earned through years of hard work while maintaining multiple jobs. I reminded him quietly. I'm not your enemy, Marcus. I just couldn't skip my graduation ceremony for an airport pickup. A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. She's talking about writing you out of her will. Says if you don't care about family, family doesn't need to care about you. The threat should have terrified me, should have sent me spiraling into desperate attempts to appease. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity. That's her choice to make, I said simply. Just like attending my graduation was mine. You've changed, he said, echoing our mother's words from the previous day. Yes, I agreed, watching Zoe and her parents through the doorway as they worked together, laughing over some shared joke. I'm finally starting to understand what healthy relationships look like. What actual support looks like. Before he could respond, I added, I need to go. We're in the middle of moving my things out. Good luck with your interview results. Then I ended the call and rejoined the people who had shown up for me, who were helping me move forward rather than holding me back. By late afternoon, my apartment was empty, my possessions divided between storage and the items I would need immediately, loaded carefully into Mr. Alvarez's truck. As we drove toward their home in a quiet suburb just 15 minutes from campus, I watched the familiar landmarks of my college years recede in the side mirror, giving way to tree-lined streets and well-kept homes. The Alvarez house was a warm, inviting 2-story craftsman with a deep front porch and colorful flower beds. The garden apartment, accessed through a separate entrance at the side of the house, exceeded all my expectations. Bright, airy, tastefully furnished, with a small private patio overlooking a backyard garden bursting with early summer blooms. "This is beautiful," I breathed, taking in the comfortable living space. "Are you sure about the rent? It seems like it should be much higher." "The amount we discussed is fair," Mr. Alvarez assured me. "We're not looking to make a profit, just cover the utilities and maintenance. Having you here would be doing us a favor, truly." As we unloaded my belongings and arranged them in the apartment, I felt a curious sensation, like stepping from turbulent waters onto solid ground. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I was making decisions based on what was healthy and right for me, not what would appease my mother or maintain a fragile family peace. That evening, I joined the Alvarez family for dinner on their back patio, the conversation flowing easily as fireflies began to illuminate the gathering dusk. When my phone buzzed with yet another call from my mother, I silenced it without apology or explanation. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The inevitable confrontation with my mother, the beginning of a new relationship dynamic that would likely be painful and difficult. But tonight, surrounded by genuine warmth and acceptance, I allowed myself to fully embrace the truth that had been slowly dawning since that morning phone call on graduation day. Family isn't always defined by blood, and love shouldn't come with conditions. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, I was walking it on my own terms, guided by my own compass, rather than the shifting approval of others. The President's Fellowship certificate now hanging on my new apartment wall wasn't just recognition of academic achievement, it was a tangible reminder that I was capable, worthy, and strong enough to chart my own course. As stars appeared in the darkening sky above the Alvarez's backyard, I silently thanked the younger version of myself, who had refused to skip graduation, who had stood her ground despite years of conditioning to do otherwise. That single act of self-respect had revealed a path to freedom I hadn't known existed, a path I was now committed to following, wherever it might lead. The week following graduation unfolded in a whirlwind of contrasts. By day, I settled into my research position with Dr. Jameson, analyzing water quality data from urban streams, and refining the watershed model that had caught the attention of the city's Environmental Commission. By evening, I explored my new living space at the Alvarez home, gradually transforming the garden apartment into a sanctuary that reflected my emerging sense of self. My mother's calls continued, their frequency increasing rather than diminishing as the days passed. I answered some, letting others go to voicemail, establishing a boundary that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago. When we did speak, her tactics cycled predictably through guilt, anger, and occasional attempts at reconciliation that inevitably circled back to demands for compliance with her vision of family obligation. "Your brother didn't get the Wellington Burke position," she informed me during one such call, her tone heavy with implied accusation. "He was too exhausted from the airport situation to perform well in the interview." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was not responsible for Marcus's interview performance. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "What other opportunities is he pursuing?" The deflection worked momentarily, but she soon circled back to her central grievance. "None of this would have happened if you'd just picked him up as I asked." "Family comes first, Sophia. I didn't raise you to be selfish." "Attending my own graduation wasn't selfish, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the familiar sting of her words. "And I've been thinking a lot about what family comes first really means. Shouldn't it work both ways? Shouldn't my graduation have mattered to you and Marcus?" Her sharp intake of breath carried through the phone. "So now you're saying we're bad parents because we asked you for one simple favor?" "That's not what I said," I clarified patiently. "I'm saying that healthy relationships involve mutual support and respect. When have you ever put my needs first, Mom? When have you ever attended something important to me, if it conflicted with what Marcus wanted?" The question hung in the silence between us, unanswerable, because we both knew the truth. My entire childhood and young adulthood had been shaped by the unspoken understanding that Marcus's desires, ambitions, and convenience would always take precedence over mine. "I don't recognize you anymore," she finally said, her voice tight with disapproval. This fellowship has gone to your head. You think you're better than your family now. Not better, I corrected gently. Just equal. I think my achievements and needs deserve the same respect as everyone else's. That's all I'm asking for. The conversation ended shortly thereafter, unresolved as all our recent interactions had been. I set down my phone and gazed out at the Alvarez's backyard garden, where Mrs. Alvarez was tending to a row of tomato plants, her movements careful and methodical in the golden evening light. The contrast between her nurturing presence and my mother's critical distance had never been more apparent. On Saturday morning, 10 days after graduation, I drove to my childhood home to collect the remainder of my belongings as planned. The familiar suburban street with its neat lawns and flowering trees triggered a complex mixture of emotions: nostalgia for the safe haven it had once represented, anxiety about the confrontation that likely awaited, and a strange new feeling of detachment, as if I were visiting a museum exhibit of my former life rather than returning home. My mother's car was in the driveway, but my father's old parking spot remained conspicuously empty, a void that still ached after 4 years. I sat in my own car for a moment, gathering courage, before finally walking up the front path and using my key to enter. The house was unnaturally quiet, the silence holding a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Mom?" I called, setting my keys on the entry table. "I'm here to get my things." She appeared in the doorway to the living room, her expression carefully neutral. "Your room is as you left it," she said, her tone formal as if addressing a guest rather than her daughter. "I've put some boxes in the hallway closet if you need them." "Thank you," I replied, equally formal. We stood awkwardly in the foyer, the distance between us measuring far more than the few feet of polished hardwood. "Is Marcus home?" "He's at a networking event," she answered. Some of us still need to work connections the old-fashioned way. The barb was predictable, designed to make me defensive or apologetic. Instead, I simply nodded and headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, refusing to engage with the implied criticism. My room remained exactly as I had left it during my last visit months ago. High school debate trophies lining the bookshelf, framed family photos on the dresser, college acceptance letters still pinned to the bulletin board. I ran my fingers over these artifacts of my younger self, recognizing how many of my choices had been shaped by the desire to earn approval, to prove my worth through achievement. The bulletin board held evidence of that journey: certificates, awards, newspaper clippings documenting successes that had never quite been enough to elevate me to equal status with Marcus in our family hierarchy. I unpinned each item carefully, sorting them into piles: keep, discard, uncertain. The process felt ceremonial somehow, a conscious evaluation of which parts of my past would accompany me into my future. Footsteps in the hallway announced my mother's approach. She appeared in the doorway, watching silently as I continued sorting through memories. "You won the state debate championship with that speech," she observed, pointing to a certificate I had just placed in the discard pile. "Your father was so proud." The mention of my father sent a familiar pang through my chest. "He was the only one who came to watch," I reminded her gently. "You and Marcus had his tennis tournament that weekend." She frowned slightly, as if the memory contradicted her preferred narrative. "We couldn't be everywhere at once, Sophia. You've always been so independent. We knew you'd be fine on your own." "Independent by necessity," I corrected, meeting her gaze directly. "There's a difference between being naturally self-sufficient and learning that your needs will always come second." Her expression hardened. "Is that what you think? That we neglected you in favor of your brother?" "Not neglected," I clarified, continuing to sort through papers and mementos as we spoke, "but definitely prioritized differently. Dad tried to balance things, but after he died, I trailed off, the grief still sharp despite the passage of time." She moved into the room then, sitting on the edge of the bed that had been mine throughout childhood. "Your father always worried about you," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "He thought you felt things too deeply, took everything too personally. He wanted you to be stronger." The revelation startled me. He never said that to me. "Of course not," she replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the bedspread. "He protected you. We both did, in our own ways." I set down the stack of photos I'd been sorting, giving her my full attention. How was making me feel second best protecting me? She sighed, a sound weighted with complexities I couldn't fully decipher. The world isn't fair, Sophia. I learned that early, and I wanted you to learn it too. Better from family who loves you than from strangers who don't care. The twisted logic of it rendered me momentarily speechless. In her mind, the constant prioritization of Marcus had been a form of preparation, a harsh lesson designed to toughen me for life's inevitable disappointments. That's not protection, Mom, I said finally. That's harm disguised as love. Real love builds you up, it doesn't tear you down to prepare you for more tearing down. She flinched slightly, her carefully maintained composure cracking to reveal something vulnerable beneath. I did the best I could with what I knew, she said quietly. My own mother was much harsher than I ever was with you. The admission offered a glimpse into generational patterns I had never fully considered, the ways in which her parenting had perhaps been a moderated version of what she herself had experienced. It didn't excuse the damage done, but it provided context that softened my anger fractionally. I believe you did what you thought was right, I acknowledged. But that doesn't mean it wasn't harmful, and it doesn't mean I have to continue accepting it now that I understand the pattern. She stood abruptly, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had appeared. If you're so determined to cut ties with your family, I won't stop you. But don't come running back when your fancy fellowship ends, and you need help. I'm not cutting ties, I clarified, maintaining my calm despite her retreat to defensiveness. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. I still want a relationship with you and Marcus, but a healthier one based on mutual respect. She scoffed lightly, heading toward the door. Mutual respect. Such academic language. Family is messier than your theories, Sophia. Always has been, always will be. After she left, I continued packing in silence, filling boxes with the selected remnants of my childhood and adolescence. When I reached the bottom drawer of my desk, I found a stack of birthday cards from my father, each containing a handwritten note expressing his pride in my accomplishments, his belief in my potential. I sat on the floor reading each one, tears blurring my vision as his voice seemed to rise from the pages, offering the unconditional support I had so desperately missed since his death. The last card from my 18th birthday just months before he died contained a quote he had carefully transcribed. The most common form of despair is not being who you are meant to be. Kierkegaard. Beneath it he had added in his distinctive handwriting, never compromise your essence for anyone's approval, Soph. Not even mine. The world needs your unique voice. I pressed the card to my chest, his words resonating with everything I had been struggling to articulate these past weeks. He had seen me clearly, had recognized the pattern of seeking validation that had shaped so much of my behavior, and had tried in his quiet way to guide me toward authenticity. When the last box was packed and loaded into my car, I found my mother in the kitchen, mechanically preparing lunch, as if it were any ordinary Saturday. I'm finished, I announced from the doorway. Thank you for the boxes. She nodded without turning around, her shoulders rigid with unspoken emotions. Take what you need, we can discuss the rest another time. I hesitated, sensing that if I left now, something important would remain unsaid. Mom, I began carefully, I found Dad's birthday cards to me. In the last one, he wrote about being true to myself, about not compromising for anyone's approval. Her knife stilled on the cutting board. Your father always did have a romantic streak, she said, but her voice lacked its usual dismissive edge. I think he saw something I'm only beginning to understand, I continued, that trying to earn conditional love is a losing game. It just teaches people they can control you through approval or disapproval. She turned then, her expression a complex mixture of irritation and something that might have been reluctant understanding. So what are you saying? That you're done trying to please your family? I'm saying I'm done trying to earn what should be freely given, I clarified. Love shouldn't be a reward for compliance. It should be the baseline, the starting point from which everything else flows. She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing a stranger where her daughter had once stood. You sound just like him sometimes, she said finally. He had these idealistic notions too. The comparison to my father felt like a gift, unexpected and precious. "I'll take that as a compliment," I said quietly. Something shifted in her expression then, a subtle softening around the eyes. "Your father would have been very proud of your fellowship," she conceded. "He always believed you were meant for something significant." The acknowledgement, however small, created an opening where there had been only walls before. "Would you like to hear about the research I'll be doing?" I offered. "The graduate program I'm considering?" She hesitated, then gestured toward the kitchen table. "I have half an hour before I need to pick up Marcus." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was a beginning. A tentative step toward the possibility of a new kind of relationship. For the next 20 minutes, I described my watershed research, the fellowship opportunities, the future I was beginning to envision for myself. She listened with more attention than she had shown in years, asking occasional questions that revealed she was genuinely trying to understand. When I finally rose to leave, the atmosphere between us had shifted subtly. The sharp edges of confrontation softened by this small exchange of genuine communication. At the front door, she surprised me by pressing something into my hand. A check. "Your graduation gift," she explained, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "I always intended to give it to you." The amount was substantial, enough to furnish my new apartment comfortably, to create a proper workspace for my research. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture despite its complicated context. She nodded stiffly, uncomfortable with the emotional undercurrent of the moment. "Let us know when you're settled," she said, the words falling somewhere between command and request. "Marcus should see your new place." It wasn't a transformation, not even close. But as I drove away from my childhood home for what felt like the final time, I recognized it as a first fragile step toward possibility, a hairline crack in patterns that had seemed immutable just weeks before. Summer unfolded with surprising grace after that initial confrontation. My research with Dr. Jameson progressed well, the watershed model attracting attention from environmental agencies beyond our city. My apartment at the Alvarez home became a true sanctuary, filled with carefully selected elements from my past and new acquisitions that reflected my emerging sense of self. The relationship with my mother remained complicated, our interactions often strained but gradually shifting toward something resembling mutual respect. Marcus, initially hostile, began to soften when I helped him rework his resume after the Wellington and Burke disappointment, introducing him to contacts I'd made through the fellowship network, who might offer alternate pathways to his goals. "I never realized how good you are at this," he admitted during one of our resume sessions, gesturing to the substantially improved document on the screen before us. "You actually made my mediocre internships sound impressive." "They weren't mediocre," I corrected, recognizing an echo of our mother's harsh judgments in his self-assessment. "You just needed to highlight the transferable skills more effectively." He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You're different since graduation," he observed, not unkindly. "More confident or something." I smiled, acknowledging the transformation that was still unfolding. "I'm learning to value myself the way I'd want others to value me," I explained. "It changes everything." By mid-July, my research had advanced significantly, attracting the attention of several prestigious graduate programs. Dr. Jameson encouraged me to consider options beyond the local university, to use the President's Fellowship to access opportunities that might otherwise have seemed out of reach. "You've earned the right to think expansively about your future," she insisted as we reviewed program materials together. "Don't limit yourself out of habit or fear." One evening in late July, I received an unexpected email from the president of Wellington University, a renowned research institution on the West Coast. The environmental science faculty had reviewed my watershed model and were impressed enough to offer early admission to their doctoral program, with a research assistantship that would complement the president's fellowship funding. I stared at the screen, hardly believing the words before me. Wellington's program was among the most competitive in the country, typically accepting fewer than 5 students annually from hundreds of applicants. The opportunity was extraordinary, and 3,000 miles from everything familiar. That night, I sat on my private patio at the Alvarez home, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness as I contemplated this unexpected fork in my path. The prospect of moving across the country brought both exhilaration and anxiety. I had just begun rebuilding my relationship with my mother and brother on healthier terms. Would geographical distance undermine that fragile progress? A soft knock at my door interrupted these reflections. Mrs. Alvarez stood there, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "Mind if I join you?" "Miguel and Zoe are watching one of those superhero movies with too many explosions for my taste." I welcomed her company, accepting the offered drink gratefully. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the evening chorus of cicadas and distant neighborhood sounds. "You seem contemplative tonight," she observed finally. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated only briefly before sharing the Holton opportunity, describing both my excitement and my concerns about leaving just as family relationships were beginning to heal. She listened attentively, her expression thoughtful in the soft patio lighting. "Can I offer a perspective from someone a bit further along life's path?" she asked when I had finished. I nodded, genuinely curious about her insights. "Healthy relationships can withstand distance," she said simply. "They might even benefit from it. Sometimes space allows people to see each other more clearly, to appreciate what might be taken for granted in daily proximity." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "When Miguel and I were first married, his company transferred him to Toronto for 2 years. My mother was furious. She had expected us to live near family, as she always had. She saw it as abandonment, as rejection of everything she valued. The parallel to my situation wasn't lost on me. What happened? We went anyway," she said with a small smile. "It was hard at first. My mother barely spoke to me for months. But gradually, something shifted. Our weekly phone calls became more meaningful than our previous daily interactions had been. When we visited, the time was precious, intentional. By the time we moved back, our relationship had actually deepened." She set her glass down on the small table between us. "The truth is, Sophia, sometimes distance is exactly what's needed for healthy connections to form. It removes the old patterns, the habitual reactions, and creates space for new ways of relating." Her words resonated deeply, offering permission to consider the Holton opportunity without the weight of guilt or obligation. "I'm afraid they'll see it as rejection," I admitted, "as choosing career over family." "They might," she acknowledged honestly, "at first, but that's their interpretation to work through, not your responsibility to manage. The question is, what path feels true to your authentic self? What choice would honor the gifts you've been given and the person you're becoming?" The question hung in the warm night air, inviting deeper reflection than an immediate answer. We sat in companionable silence for a while longer before she rose to return inside, squeezing my shoulder gently as she passed. "Whatever you decide, we're in your corner. Remember that." That night, I reread my father's last birthday card, his words about not compromising my essence for anyone's approval resonating with new clarity. I thought about Dr. Jameson's encouragement to think expansively, about President Harlow's observation regarding students who succeed despite extraordinary challenges, about Mrs. Alvarez's insight that healthy relationships can withstand, and even benefit from distance. That means a lot. My mother studied me across the table, her expression unreadable. "Your father always said you'd go farther than any of us," she said finally. I suppose he was right, in more ways than one. It wasn't enthusiastic blessing, but neither was it opposition. It was acknowledgement, perhaps even a grudging respect for the path I had chosen. For now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation, finishing my summer research, making arrangements for the cross-country move, saying temporary goodbyes to the people who had formed my support system through this transformative period. Dr. Jameson hosted a small gathering of faculty and fellow researchers to celebrate my next steps. Zoe and her parents helped pack my modest belongings for shipping to California. Even my mother contributed in her own way, insisting on purchasing practical items for my new apartment with a gruff, "You'll need proper sheets at least." On my last night in town, I sat once more on the patio of the Alvarez's garden apartment, marveling at how much had changed in the 3 months since graduation. The frightened, people-pleasing young woman who had answered her mother's call that May morning seemed like a different person entirely from the woman I had become. Still evolving, still learning, but increasingly anchored in her own worth rather than others' validation. My phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Call when you land tomorrow. Marcus wants to know about the apartment." It wasn't warm, wasn't effusive, but it was communication without manipulation, a small but significant shift from where we had begun. I typed back a simple "will do," smiling faintly at this evidence of progress. The relationship remained complex, likely always would, but the dynamics had shifted enough to allow space for authenticity on both sides. It was a beginning, imperfect but real. As fireflies illuminated the August darkness one last time, I thought about the journey that had begun with a single act of boundary setting on graduation day. That moment of choosing myself had created ripples that continued to expand outward, transforming not only my relationship with my family, but my understanding of my own capacity for growth and resilience. The President's Fellowship Certificate, carefully packed for transport to my new life in California, represented far more than academic achievement. It stood as a tangible reminder that recognition can come from unexpected sources, that validation doesn't need to be withheld or conditional, that excellence can be acknowledged without demanding submission in return. My father had tried to teach me this, in his gentle way, before time ran out for us. "Never compromise your essence for anyone's approval," he had written. It had taken years and a moment of crisis for me to fully embrace that wisdom, but now that I had, there was no returning to the old patterns of appeasing, accommodating, diminishing myself to maintain relationships built on control rather than care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new territory to navigate. But I would face it all standing firmly in my truth, guided by my own inner compass, rather than the shifting approval of others. The journey ahead would not be without difficulty. Genuine change rarely is. But for the first time in my life, I was walking it as my authentic self, neither defined by others' limitations, nor constrained by their expectations. As stars appeared in the vast sky above me, I silently thanked every person and circumstance that had contributed to this transformation. My father's quiet wisdom, Dr. Jameson's steadfast mentorship, the Alvarez family's generous support, even my mother's ultimatum that had finally forced me to choose my own path. Each had played a role in bringing me to this moment of clarity and purpose, this threshold between what had been and what might yet be. The President's announcement of my fellowship on graduation day had marked not just recognition of academic achievement, but the beginning of a more profound journey, one that led inward toward self-knowledge and outward toward genuine connection. It was a journey that would continue long after the fellowship ended, guiding me toward a future defined not by others' expectations, but by my own truest calling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.